It is in the ball is in their court. They have to open the means of the conducive environment to communicate and to negotiate and to dialogue.
America just woke up to a shocker. $6 billion of critical supplies frozen solid by a single decision from a country Washington had written off as irrelevant. A decision that has made factories across the Midwest go dark and medicine production grind to a halt. Now, the White House is scrambling for answers while cargo ships drift helplessly in foreign waters. And this is only the beginning of something far bigger.
But we always have been trying to negotiate and settle our differences in a peaceful manner. The Somali government has never tried to force or to fight.
Early morning, when most of America was still asleep, officials at a maritime hub along Africa's eastern coastline issued a directive that would shake the foundation of global commerce. Somalia's ports, which for decades were deemed to be pivotal and historic gateways connecting 3 continents through the Indian Ocean, had just suspended all American imports. No warning, no negotiation, just a straight order halting the practice. Within a few hours of this directive, chaos started ensuing as shipping companies frantically rerouted billion-dollar vessels. Terminals from Singapore to Rotterdam received identical alerts. American cargo was now stuck in limbo. 8,000 miles away from Mogadishu in Washington, the White House Situation Room became a beehive of activities as advisors gathered, pulling up satellite feeds showing something nobody expected to see: container ships sitting motionless against turquoise waters. Each of these ships filled with electronics, farm machinery, vehicle components, and medicine ingredients. Yet all were now frozen. Then the number dropped. $6 billion. That's the worth of American supply now frozen in the seas following this order. So why was this such a shocker? You see, for generations, these East African shipping corridors had operated smoothly, serving as vital links in global trade networks, so much so that Washington always assumed that this pathway was secure and unchangeable. After all, how could Somalia, a nation recovering from decades of instability, suddenly flex this kind of economic muscle? But in Mogadishu's port district, the reality was completely the opposite. Authority figures holding a press conference with zero anxiety in their voices, unapologetic and firm. They laid out new standards, environmental checks, updated tariff structures that favored Somalia, and other requirements for local partnership agreements. And then, Africa erupted in applause. Social media platforms were filled with support while regional leaders issued statements praising the boldness. Across the continent, officials began publicly questioning their own maritime agreements with foreign powers. The question was simple: if Somalia can do it, why not us? Inside Washington's Emergency Economic Council, advisors presented 3 options. But there was a catch. All of them were terrible. Option 1 entailed rerouting everything around Africa's Cape of Good Hope. This alternative pathway would extend journeys by approximately 10 to 14 days and add hundreds of dollars per container in fuel costs alone. West Coast terminals would definitely buckle under such a sudden influx. That math was infeasible. Then came option number 2, which was to negotiate. But with what leverage? Somalia wasn't budging. Option 3, impose sanctions, America's traditional go-to strategy. But things were different this time. Intelligence reports showed Asian investors were already circling and ready to fill any void America might leave behind. This realization created an even bigger crisis. Boardrooms of corporate America erupted as CEOs demanded immediate government action. Some pushed for diplomatic muscle, while others wanted economic pressure. However, there was a faction that chose diplomacy and suggested appeasement, but they all seemed to have missed something very important. The fundamental rules had changed, and America no longer had the upper hand. Meanwhile, as weeks dragged on, Somalia's Port Authority held another press conference. Officials spoke with the same calm authority. They made it clear that this was not an act of hostility. This was sovereignty. According to one senior official, this was the necessary correction to decades of imbalanced agreements that had enriched foreign corporations while African markets struggled. Finally, American diplomats landed in Mogadishu. The first 2 sessions between the 2 countries lasted 8 hours. Americans demanded cargo release citing economic damage. Somali negotiators had a different message: new agreements first. Fair ones. Agreements acknowledging modern economic reality and eliminating policies designed when Africa was too fragmented and weakened to resist. The philosophical clash was stark. Washington argued that sudden policy shifts destabilized global commerce. Somalia's response cut deeper. Global commerce had destabilized African economies for generations. If the world wanted stability now, it would be built on mutual respect. In the end, no breakthroughs emerged that day or the next. Back home, the damage had now become impossible to ignore. Manufacturing plants across America's industrial heartland went silent. Automotive assembly lines stopped mid-production. Pharmaceutical companies issued warnings after critical medication ingredients were trapped thousands of miles away. Midwestern agricultural producers were also left helpless as planting seasons approached, yet the equipment they had ordered months earlier had been trapped. The $6 billion loss estimate kept climbing daily. Inside the Oval Office, the president faced an impossible chess game as every move carried catastrophic risk. Imposing economic penalties meant handing over America's influence to Asian powers ready to step in immediately. Launching retaliatory measures could ignite a border maritime crisis affecting every trading nation. Backing down publicly wasn't even an option, as it would mean political suicide. For the first time in modern memory, Washington was negotiating from weakness. And then, something remarkable happened. Something that changed the entire game. Somalia didn't stand alone for long. The African Continental Free Trade Area began transforming from ambitious paperwork into coordinated action. Trade ministers from Kenya, Tanzania, and Djibouti issued a joint statement backing Somalia's position. Then Ethiopia joined, then a host of others, and within days, East African officials announced plans for unified maritime regulations across multiple port cities. And for the first time, Africa was moving as a unit. But Washington wasn't ready for this next part. The ports weren't sitting empty waiting for America's return. Instead, Chinese investors had already developed a blueprint of expanding port infrastructure across Africa's eastern coastline. They'd even injected over $21 billion in African port and railway development. Then, Turkish construction firms arrived with partnership proposals. Middle Eastern nations, particularly the UAE through investments in logistics hubs, also began positioning themselves as crucial partners in Africa's infrastructure boom. Indian companies started negotiating access agreements. At Mogadishu's terminals, cranes moved continuously. Container ships bearing logos from Shanghai, Mumbai, Istanbul, and Dubai rolled through inspection lines while American cargo sat frozen nearby. The message was unmistakable. Global commerce wasn't waiting for Washington to accept new realities. And to add insult to injury, the White House received intelligence that shocked everyone. If American companies bypassed Somalia entirely, they would encounter similar regulatory frameworks at alternative African ports. Now, it was clear that Africa was angling to become an economic gatekeeper. When American diplomats returned to Mogadishu for the second round of talks, something fundamental had shifted in their approach. They were no longer demanding or pressuring Mogadishu. Instead, they came prepared to listen. Somalia now had America where it wanted, and it laid out explicit terms. First up, technology transfer programs supported by funds like the Continental Tech Fund with its $10 billion allocation. Second, investment commitments in port modernization and infrastructure. Third, updated tariff structures reflecting contemporary market values. And most critically, America's full and unconditional recognition of Somalia's authority to regulate its own maritime operations without external interference. For the next few weeks, negotiators hammered out specific details. After completion, the framework was handed to the American president for review. Upon reviewing it, the president knew this wasn't the outcome Washington had wanted, but it was the only viable path forward to restore critical supply chains. He had no option but to authorize its implementation. Eventually, Somalia gave the green light for cargo clearance to resume. Cranes immediately roared back to life, and container ships that had waited for weeks finally began moving through inspection lines. The immediate crisis was resolved. But no one dare ignore the deeper truth anymore. The world had permanently transformed. African nations recognized their collective strength could reshape global commerce. The United States confronted the fragility of supply chains it had assumed were invulnerable. And Somalia emerged not as a temporary disruptor, but as a legitimate authority in Eastern African maritime governance. In the end, the reality dawned. Africa would chart its future independently, on its own conditions, and the rest of the world had no choice but to recognize this new reality. And this is just the beginning. Consider subscribing so you're among the first to be notified whenever we drop new videos.